So Peter Temes here, founder and president of the Institute for Innovation and Large Organizations, with my friend and colleague, one of our member organization representatives, Gianni Giacomelli, Chief Innovation Officer at Genpact, very valued member of our institute. He's presented brilliantly more than once to our groups, but he is also the head of innovation design at MIT's Collective Intelligence Design Lab. So Gianni, if you could just tell us in a couple of sentences what the work is in each of those roles, we'll have more of a conversation.
Okay, so Genpact, Chief Innovation Officer, part of our executive management team. I've been there for 10 years. I've done quite a few things in my 10 years, all related to innovation, all actually in the last 5 years, mostly related to creating capability in the company so that the company can innovate. The initial stint was more normal COE, portfolio, investments, etc. But as I graduated more from the doer to a systemic orchestration, I found that creating capability in the system is a better way of creating momentum in innovation. That's the reason why, for example, 2.5 years ago, I took over our learning and development function, and we completely overhauled how we do it, based on the premise that if the quote-unquote mainstream workers have the tools to participate in the flow of transformation and innovation, you get better innovation at the aggregate level. So that is my day job. Separate from that is the MIT work. I've been collaborating with the Center for Collective Intelligence for about 10 years. About 3 years ago, I took a research affiliate formally role, which is head of design at the lab. The lab was being created to fundamentally connect the dots between academia and the real world. Not that academia is not the real world, but the world of implementation of ideas. So the idea there was, can we think about design of new solutions, right? Innovation design through a lens of collective intelligence, trying to apply collective intelligence and the notions of collective intelligence as an operating model and an organizational mode for organizations, to a discipline that typically tends to focus on processes, workflows, and more recently through design thinking, human-centered design. But even design thinking doesn't natively think in systems. And when you think about, if you had gone to a design thinker 20 years ago and told them, there's something called the Encyclopedia Britannica, do me a better job at Encyclopedia Britannica, a design thinker would have said, I'm going to create better UI and, better look and feel. Maybe I'll do it digital. But nobody would come up with Wikipedia, right? And Wikipedia took over the world, right? 50 times bigger for a fraction of the cost, much more granular. And Wikipedia is actually one of the good archetypes, actually old archetypes, but still a good one for, it's collective intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we study at MIT, that I contribute to, trying to evolve the discipline of design thinking to include some of the notions of collective intelligence for the benefit of the design thinkers of the world and the innovators of the world, who hopefully at some point will be able to harness in their own innovation exercises the concept of superminds or augmented collective intelligence, which is specifically what I focus on, right? The digitally enhanced collective intelligence of networks of people.
Fabulous. So if I'm running innovation or R&D or learning at a global 2000 company, what should I know about how collective intelligence works? What should I learn? What should I do?
So first of all, is be intentional about harnessing collective intelligence as opposed to backing yourself into it. Right? We all grew up in periods in which, again, more deterministic, hierarchical, and then increasingly digitized, but yet, not bottoms up, not community-based, not ecosystem-based. organizational models were the mantra. So the first thing is know that you have a blind spot, right? That you don't natively think of communities and the networks and the cognitive surplus that people have as a vector for creating power in your organization. That's the first thing. The second thing is just get ready to embrace new tools. In the report that I put together, that you've seen some versions of the manuscript, I identify a number of building blocks from, for example, enabling the network to be discoverable and the nodes of the network to be discoverable to each other so that people know who else is working on certain things and they can connect, to providing incentives for the nodes of the network to really cooperate above and beyond the potentially hierarchical incentives and KPIs that they would have. And third, creating information feeders so that every community doesn't become insular. I mean, the example that we see now with social media, crazy developments that we had over the last few years is just that communities can go very, very insular. So information feeders to debunk and in many respects, the ILO is an information feeder for many of us. And possibly we are an information feeder to you, right? Again, and the last piece is collaboration platforms. Again, we were discussing about Microsoft Viva and what Microsoft is doing in this space after the launch of Teams, which basically, this is a big company and they're betting the farm on the ability of people to come together as collective intelligence is supported by technology. So technology collaboration platform is quite important. So those are the four things that I would say that you would do, on top of recognizing that we all have a bias because of where we grew up as managers. Yeah. You're on mute.
I love that you're framing Microsoft investing more and embracing culturally much more of the collaborative information sharing and discoverability as betting the farm, because I think it's a different kind of betting the farm. Something we've talked about and done a lot of advising around, that the one big bet, excuse me, the one big bet or the two or three big bets usually amount to a poor strategy. We say, look, don't bet the farm, bet the chicken, bet the horse. And when you have a win, then you increase what's at risk. But if I'm understanding you, and if I understand what Microsoft is doing, it's not so much as one big bet. It's a reorientation toward an almost infinite number of smaller bets and discoveries that are coordinated. Is that, yeah, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, so they call it an experience. And from that standpoint, it's a big bet from a marketing and positioning standpoint.
Yes.
Because they don't launch new things very often. The engineering side of it is a portfolio of smaller bets, right? There's a learning component, there's a knowledge management component, there are quite a few things. But the wrapper is a unified wrapper, and they will spend significant marketing and channel development money into that bet.
Yeah, I think that's fabulous. I don't know if you've met Slavik Kerner, who was the chief data officer for Microsoft's enterprise-facing product.
I think I did.
Yeah, so Power BI, a few other things.
Yep.
Part of what I love about witnessing all this unfolding is, we worked with Slavik a little bit at Microsoft. Wonderful guy, came into Microsoft through the Nokia acquisition. He's now moved to be the chief data officer at Humana, which runs large statewide Medicare programs. I love seeing that diffusion, right? So he talks about democratizing data, which is at the heart of Microsoft's effort that leads to Viva and other things. And then he brings that to Humana, has a staff of 200 in his data group. Someone's always coming and going. You see this kind of diffusion. In some ways, it's almost like that distribution of small bets, small earnings. And we as individuals become sorters and carriers. And for the most part, I would propose, want to hear your thought about this. We take with us what works more than we take with us what doesn't.
I hope that's true. I think typically successful people tend to be that. It's just natural selection of ideas. I also do think that there's a risk that later in our careers, we try to kind of exhume things that we worked on many, many years before, just because we want to give it one more try so that we can connect the dots and we make that thing that might have ended up, in the, we've forgotten about it. We want to give it a one more try. And sometimes that is not right. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think in some ways that's a little bit of it's a natural impulse, but I think it's also a little bit of a byproduct of the way we emphasize passion. We want the passion, but we can get blocked. We can have the passion too much in what we imagine and express, as opposed to the passion for this kind of data-driven sense of what works, the eureka passion, right? But eureka is interesting. It means I've got it. There's something better I think we've been evolving toward in business culture, which isn't I've got it, but it worked, which is, in the lab. I love that. It worked. So what's one thing in the past year that you've done based on this understanding that you're developing at such a high level about collective intelligence, democratizing the system? And by the way, we were talking before we started recording. I hear a lot of democratization in what you describe when you talk about learning systems that have that kind of edge intelligence that flows in.
Probably the biggest thing that I've done is bringing up to scale the learning and development infrastructure that we now have at Genpact. I mean, it's 100,000 people. A bunch of us are really canary in the coal mine because we work in transformation of operations, and digitization will change radically, and actually it already does change radically how that business is run. And so in the last year, we actually finally managed to scale up the platform that we've been building for the last 2 years. And the results are pretty significant. In 2020, we had about 10 million hours of learning. Just to give you a sense, 10 million hours of learning is, give or take, 1/4 of the entire LinkedIn learning, right? So, and we are just one company. And that number is like 3x, actually 2.7x what it was in 2018 at comparable cost, right? And for the skills that we need, again, that organic creation of skills, 73 skills, and the knowledge communities around it, make it so that our curriculum is natively aligned with the business priorities, not some translation into L&D folks who now have understood, but they didn't really, and they take time to adjust. So that job in 2020 was a job that wouldn't have been possible if I didn't use the operating model of a collective intelligence, in which I literally harness everybody, subject matter experts, learners, become reviewers and peer reviewers of other learners. And that has a lot more power than just a normal hierarchical system where somebody gives requirements to an L&D department and then they buy materials and they put it into a learning experience platform.
So you're not going to answer the kinds of questions I've been asking you by saying, well, you do X, Y, and Z in sequence and you get the right result. What I'm hearing more of is you create the generative orientation so that the very large number of participants are not only shaping the knowledge that goes in, but the organizing principles that themselves adapt to changing circumstances. Is that a fair?
So I'm trying to do two things. One is create the muscle of knowledge, learning, so that people can interoperate in large groups, right? That's the core of digital transformation. Pods, agile, multifunctional groups, etc. They need to have enough knowledge of each other's business so that they can interoperate. The other part is creating a knowledge collaboration platform that allows these folks to surface the artifacts, co-create, new artifacts, and then plug it back into the learning environment. Those two are big engines that, unfortunately, I mean, if you think about it, Peter, is there a chief learning and knowledge and collaboration officer in companies? It as a theme is orphaned you have a CIO, you have a CHRO, then a learning and development assists with the CHRO, which it's also a debatable choice. So what I'm really talking about is, can we go do a cross-enterprise job of collective intelligence empowering, right? And then the system will largely take care of itself.
That's right. Perfect. Let's end there.
Okay.